I was ready to divorce because my wife became friends with my bull. Look, I'm 32 years old, and I have a super complicated relationship with my brother Dean, who is 33. He's my only sibling, and everyone assumes we have to get along, but he has bullied me almost my entire life. I gave him several chances, but he never changed, he never stopped. Some people downplayed it, saying it was just sibling jokes, that we just didn't get along. He made fun of me for not being as athletic as him, called me a loser. He said I looked like a fat guy running, that it would be cool if I tripped. He laughed if I exercised. My parents had cameras, and he tried to take pictures of me to spread them around school. As a kid, I had stomach problems, and he told his friends that I pooped my pants, then spread the rumor around school. A few times at school, he would shout at me, asking why I was sitting there with shitty pants and why I didn't wear diapers or something. If I invited friends over as a teenager, Dean would bring up the pooping my pants thing and humiliate me with other embarrassing stories. He did the same when I brought my first girlfriend home in college. For years, he teased me, saying he had slept with my ex when I brought her home. He said I would die a virgin, that no girl could ever sleep with me because I was too weird, a fucking nerd. Because of all this, I stopped going home and told my parents I wasn't going to let him treat me like that anymore. Now I see that they didn't do what they should have, either, and they let Dean get away with it. They never took sides, which meant they didn't say anything while he treated me like shit and tried to humiliate me. Sometimes, they told me he was maturing and all. And I tried, but he never did. He still hasn't. And I gave him another chance recently. That brings me to my wife. We've been together for 6 years, married for 4, and we have 2 kids. She knows my history with Dean and told me I deserve better. But then she met Dean at my parents' house, witnessed him treating me the same way, which made me insist on leaving early. And then she started talking to him online, and they actually became real friends. They text each other and make plans, and that hurts me so much. She told me I can't control her relationships, and that she thinks it's good that they connect because he has kids with his wife, and we have 2, and the kids deserve to know each other. She also told me they have things in common and are good friends. I told her that, seeing how he treats me, I expected her to stay as far away from him as possible, and that it hurts me that she has befriended him. She said that when she met him, it was different, that he's an asshole to me, but he's not a bad guy in general. I told her I didn't like it, and that we needed therapy together to talk about all this, because our marriage wouldn't survive if she insisted on staying friends with him. She asked if I would really consider divorcing her over her friendship with my brother, and I said yes. I told her that by making this decision, she was stabbing me in the back. She said I was crazy and controlling and told her family, who think I'm selfish for considering breaking up our family over this. My own friends and 2 of my cousins, who know the story and agree that my brother is a huge asshole to me, think my wife is wrong and that it's understandable that I can't stay with her because of this. But I know this is a huge thing, and it's going to hurt my kids. I also know that I've wondered if my wife and Dean are having an affair. I've read some of their messages, and they don't seem flirty, and most of their plans are online. But even if it's just a friendship, to me it feels like a betrayal. From this point on, everything has started to fall apart. I feel isolated in my own home. Every time I try to talk to my wife, the conversation ends in an argument. She tells me I'm overreacting, that I need to get over what happened with Dean, and that I can't expect everyone to hate my brother just because I do. But it's not about hate, it's about respect. It's about how Dean has never shown the slightest remorse for what he did to me. It's about how I'm still his target every time we're in the same room. A few days ago, I found my wife laughing at something on her phone. When I asked her what it was, she said Dean had sent her a meme. I couldn't believe it. I asked her if she really didn't understand how painful it was for me to see her enjoying his company. She looked at me like I was crazy and told me I needed help. Maybe I do, but I also need to feel supported in my own home. Last night, I had a conversation with my parents. I told them what was happening, and they said I couldn't blame my wife for wanting to have a relationship with her brother-in-law. That maybe if I tried to see Dean in a different light, I'd realize he has changed. But he hasn't. He's still the same guy who made fun of me when I was a kid. And now, somehow, he's wormed his way into my marriage too. I'm at a point where I don't know what to do. I don't want to lose my family, but I also don't want to live feeling like a stranger in my own home. Every day that passes, I feel like I'm running out of options. A few days have passed since my conversation with my parents, and the knot in my stomach just keeps tightening. Everything remains the same or worse. My wife and I barely talk beyond what is necessary. Our interactions have been reduced to monosyllables and evasive glances. Sometimes I wonder if she truly understands what this means to me, or if she has simply decided to ignore it. I tried giving her space, thinking that maybe if I didn't insist so much on the topic, she would reflect on it on her own. But it was a mistake. The more I distanced myself, the closer she seemed to get to Dean. She no longer hides her conversations with him. She doesn't even bother to pretend when she laughs at something he writes. And the worst part is that she doesn't even seem uncomfortable when I confront her anymore. She tells me it's all in my head, that I'm obsessed with my brother, and that I need to get over my resentment. Yesterday, when checking my phone, I saw a new message in the family chat. A photo of our children playing with Dean's kids. I didn't know how to react. I stared at the image for minutes, feeling a mix of sadness and anger. I don't want to keep my children away from their cousins, but I also don't want them to grow up thinking that what Dean did to me was okay. Because if he never faced any real consequences for his actions, where is the lesson? During dinner, I asked my wife if she had arranged that meeting. She looked at me with an expression of annoyance and exhaustion and said yes, that she wasn't going to deprive our kids of having a relationship with their family because of my personal drama. Those words hurt me more than I expected. It wasn't about drama. It was about respect. It was about the fact that Dean had never shown the slightest remorse for what he did to me. For him, it was all an eternal joke. That night, we slept with our backs turned to each other, in complete silence. I could feel her presence beside me, but it was as if she was miles away. In the darkness, I wondered if it really made sense to keep fighting for this. If our relationship was already doomed, and we just didn't want to admit it. But then I thought about our kids. I thought about what it would mean for them to see us separated, about how it would affect their daily lives. And I decided to try one more time. The next day, I went to therapy alone. My wife had refused to go together, so I decided to do it on my own. The therapist patiently listened to my entire story, and when I finished, her response was simple. I understand why you feel betrayed. Those words gave me some comfort. I wasn't crazy. It wasn't irrational to feel this way. She asked me questions about my childhood, about my relationship with my parents, and how it had affected my self-esteem. Little by little, I started to see how deeply everything had sunk in. It wasn't just a resentment toward Dean, but also the feeling that I had never been important enough for anyone to stand up for me. And now, the person I loved the most was also choosing to ignore it. The therapist suggested that I talk to my wife in a different way, without attacks or demands, but by expressing how I felt from a vulnerable place. To try to explain to her how much it hurt me, without making her defensive. I promised myself I would try, even though part of me feared it would be in vain. That night, after our kids were asleep, I found her in the living room, watching TV, with her phone in hand. I sat next to her, and, with a huge effort to control my frustration, I told her I needed her to listen to me. I talked about how I felt, about how much it hurt me to see her so close to the person who had hurt me the most in life, how much it had affected my self-esteem, and how her friendship with him was bringing everything back to the surface. That I didn't want to control her relationships, but that I also couldn't ignore what this meant to me. For a moment, it seemed like she understood. Her expression changed, her eyes softened. But then she sighed and said something that shattered me. I can't change the way I feel about him just because you want me to. I didn't respond. I didn't know what to say. I felt like all the effort, all the vulnerability I had shown, had crashed against a wall. I didn't want to argue. I didn't want to insist. So I just got up and went to the bedroom, feeling more alone than ever. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept circling the same question. Where do I belong in all of this? If my own wife can't understand how much this hurts me, then what's left for us? I felt powerless, like a spectator in my own life. And the worst part is that I didn't know how much longer I could hold on before completely breaking. The dawn brought with it the same feeling of heaviness that I had woken up with for the past few weeks. Each day felt like a repetition of the last, an empty routine where tension floated in the air like an invisible specter. I got up before my wife and kids, searching for a moment of solitude to organize my thoughts. The hot coffee did nothing to ease the pressure in my chest. In the bathroom mirror, I saw a reflection I barely recognized. My eyes were surrounded by dark circles. My expression was that of a man who had endured too much for too long. I wondered how I had gotten to this point, how the life I had built had turned into something so foreign to what I had imagined. The house started to fill with noise as the kids woke up. Their laughter and conversations were the only part of my day that didn't feel like a burden. Watching them play, I wished with all my heart that they would never have to go through what I had, that they would never feel as insignificant as I had felt with Dean. My wife came downstairs shortly after, phone in hand and wearing that neutral expression she had adopted whenever we were in the same room. There was no good morning, no warm glance, just the sound of the coffee maker and her fingers sliding across the screen. I knew exactly who she was talking to, and it made my stomach turn. After breakfast, while the kids were watching cartoons, I tried once again to have a conversation with her. Not to argue, but to understand. I asked her if she had ever tried to put herself in my shoes, to imagine what it felt like to be humiliated the way I had been. She looked at me with a mix of exhaustion and impatience and replied, "I don't want to keep having this conversation. You can't ask me to hate someone just because you do." That sentence felt like a stab to the heart. It wasn't about hate. It never was. It was about respect, about loyalty, about not feeling alone in my own home. But it seemed that no matter how I explained it, she had decided to see it as an irrational whim on my part, something she could ignore until it went away on its own. By the afternoon, I was hit with another blow, one I didn't expect, one that caught me completely off guard. I received a message from an unknown number. I opened it out of curiosity, only to find a screenshot of a conversation between Dean and my wife. The message that accompanied the image was simple: "Open your eyes." My heart started pounding. The conversation showed Dean saying that I had always been too sensitive, that I never understood jokes, and that's why I never fit in, that she was too good to be putting up with my attitude. And the worst part was her response, a simple "I know." I felt like the ground had been ripped from under me. Not only were they talking about me, but my wife was agreeing with him. She was validating what he was saying. I didn't know who had sent me the screenshot, but at that moment, I didn't care. The only thing I could think about was that everything I had feared was true. She wasn't just ignoring how I felt. She was actively participating in belittling me. I couldn't stay in the house. I left without saying a word. I needed space. I needed time to process it. I walked aimlessly, my head spinning, my phone clenched in my hand. I thought about calling her, about confronting her right away, but I knew that in my state, I would only end up saying things I might regret. After a couple of hours, I headed to my cousin's house, one of the few people who had been on my side through all of this. He greeted me with concern when he saw my expression and handed me a beer without asking questions. Only when I had calmed down enough did I show him the message. His reaction was immediate. "You can't keep living like this." I knew he was right. I couldn't keep letting this consume me, but I also didn't know what the next step was. Leave? Fight for my marriage? Demand an explanation? Every option seemed to lead to a result I didn't want to face. I went back home at dusk. My wife looked at me as I walked in, but she didn't say anything. She probably thought I had gone out to clear my head, with no idea of what was actually going through my mind. I didn't mention the message. Not yet. I needed to be sure of how to handle it, of how to prevent it from turning into yet another empty argument with no answers. I went to bed without dinner, without saying a word. I lay down and closed my eyes, but sleep never came. There was only one question running through my mind. From this point on, what comes next? The next day, I woke up with a heavy head, as if I hadn't slept at all. I lay there for a while, listening to the distant sound of the television and the murmurs of the kids in the living room. I didn't feel like getting up, but I couldn't just stay there pretending everything was fine either. When I finally left the bedroom, my wife was in the kitchen pouring herself some coffee. Her face showed no emotion, as if the night before had meant nothing. I wondered if she was waiting for me to speak first, but I didn't. Instead, I grabbed a glass of water and sat at the table without saying a word. The silence was thick, uncomfortable. I knew I couldn't avoid the conversation for much longer. After several minutes of awkwardness, I decided to confront her. With a calm but firm voice, I told her we needed to talk. She sighed, set her cup down on the counter, and crossed her arms. "This again?" she asked, clearly annoyed. I pulled out my phone and showed her the screenshot. Her eyes scanned the image, but her expression remained unchanged. "So what?" she said, without a hint of guilt. I didn't say anything that wasn't true. I felt anger rising in my throat like fire. "Do you really think that about me? That I'm just some bitter person who refuses to let go of the past?" She rolled her eyes. "I think you're so caught up in your hatred for Dean that you can't see beyond it. You can't expect everyone to hate him just because you do." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "I don't want you to hate him. I want you to understand why this hurts me. I want you to support me. I support you in a lot of things, but this is different. I can't just cut someone out of my life just because you want me to." I stared at her, feeling the last bits of hope crumble inside me. If she couldn't see what this meant to me, then how could we possibly move forward? The rest of the day passed in a blur. I felt disconnected, like I was watching my own life from the outside. I took the kids to the park to clear my head, but even as they played, I couldn't stop replaying my conversation with my wife. I knew I had reached a point where I couldn't keep ignoring reality. When we got back home, Dean was there. He was sitting on the couch with a relaxed smile, chatting with my wife as if everything was normal, as if he hadn't spent my whole life making me feel small, as if he weren't the reason I now felt like a stranger in my own home. My pulse quickened, and I felt a burning sensation in my chest. "What are you doing here?" I asked, keeping my voice tense but controlled. Dean turned his head and looked at me with the same expression as always, that mix of superiority and barely concealed disdain. "Just stopped by to say hi. Thought we could talk like adults." I let out a humorless laugh. "Talk like adults? You and me? Don't make me laugh." Dean shrugged. "Look, I'm not going to apologize for the past. We were just kids, and you took things too seriously. But if you want to keep holding a grudge, that's your problem, not mine." I stayed silent for a moment, feeling how each word of his drove another knife into my patience. "This isn't about a grudge. It's about respect. And you've never had any for me." My wife intervened. "Please, don't make this bigger than it already is." I turned to her, incredulous. "I'm not the one making this bigger. I'm the only one who actually understands what's happening here." Dean stood up, shoved his hands in his pockets, and smirked smugly. "You know, you are always the dramatic one in the family. I thought you'd grow out of it, but I see you haven't." I took a deep breath, trying to contain the fury threatening to spill over. "If you really thought we could talk like adults, then you wouldn't have come here with that attitude." I turned to my wife. "If he's welcome in this house, then maybe I'm not." The silence that followed was absolute. My wife looked at me in shock, as if she hadn't expected things to reach this point. Dean just smirked, enjoying the moment, and I realized I had reached the edge of something I couldn't come back from. I grabbed my jacket and walked out without looking back. The cold air hit my face as I walked aimlessly. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stay there. Something inside me had broken, and I wasn't sure if it could ever be repaired. The hours passed slowly as I walked aimlessly, the cold cutting my cheeks, and my mind clouded by a whirlwind of thoughts. Everything I had tried to hold together for so long was falling apart. My marriage, my sense of belonging, the little stability I had left. I felt like I could no longer continue living a life where I had become a stranger in my own home. I arrived at my cousin's house unannounced. When he opened the door, he looked at me with a mix of surprise and concern. "I need to talk," I said bluntly. He nodded and let me in. We sat on the couch, and without hesitation, I told him everything that had happened. I talked about the message, the disdain in my wife's words, Dean's attitude, and how I felt completely displaced. When I finished, my cousin remained silent for a few seconds before saying, "Brother, you don't have anything left to prove. You've tried to fix this in every possible way, but you can't keep letting them walk all over you. It's time to think about yourself." His words hit me hard. For the first time in a long time, someone was telling me what I already knew, but refused to accept. Staying in this situation was only destroying me. I spent the night at his house. There was no rush to return to a place where I felt like an intruder. I reflected on what I wanted for my future and came to the inevitable conclusion: I couldn't keep living like this. It was time to do something final. The next day, with the sun barely peeking over the horizon, I went back home. My wife was in the kitchen, and when she saw me walk in, she frowned. "Can I know where you've been?" she asked coldly. "Thinking," I replied. I sat down across from her and, without hesitation, said, "This isn't working. We can't keep doing this. I don't want to live with someone who doesn't respect me, and you can't keep pretending everything is fine when it clearly isn't." She sighed, setting her cup down on the table. "Are you serious?" Her tone was no longer annoyed, but incredulous. "You're going to throw everything away over something so stupid?" I shook my head. "This isn't stupid. This is my dignity, my peace of mind, my happiness. I've endured too much, and I'm not going to anymore." There was a long silence. She looked at me as if waiting for me to change my mind, but this time there was no room for doubt. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she sighed. "If that's what you want, it's what I need." What followed was a painful but necessary process. We talked to the kids as carefully as possible. We agreed on the terms of our separation with as much civility as we could, though there was no escaping the tension in every conversation. I found a place to start over. It wasn't easy, but every step I took toward my own peace reassured me that I had made the right decision. The divorce was a long and, at times, painful process, but there was never a doubt in my heart that it was for the best. Dean tried to contact me a couple of times after that, but I never responded. There was nothing left to say. Eventually, his attempt stopped. I don't know what my ex-wife told him, and I don't care. The first few months were strange, a mix of relief and loneliness. But little by little, I rediscovered myself. I reconnected with parts of me that I had forgotten, with hobbies I had put aside. My children were my greatest motivation, and I made sure they lacked nothing, neither love nor stability. One day, while sitting in a cafe reading a book, I realized something. There was no more bitterness in my chest. That constant feeling of being trapped was gone. I had found something I thought I would never have: peace. Dean could continue in his world. My ex-wife could make her own choices. It no longer affected me, because, for the first time in my life, I had chosen myself. And that was enough.